Let's start with a very interesting story from Not Dagia. Music teacher gets mad at me for not being able to hear her. I'm deaf. Hi, my first post on Reddit, so please excuse any formatting mistakes and any other mistakes. Obligatory statement that I'm on mobile, yada yada yada. TL. DR at the bottom for you lazy cows /S. So this happened a couple years ago when I was fresh at high school in year 7. I was in the grade for 11-year-olds for international peeps. One important thing to note with me is that I'm profoundly deaf in both ears and cannot hear a single thing without the use of my cochlear implants, CI. However, I can lip read pretty accurately, so I'm not completely lost without them. Another thing to note is that my I run on batteries and these need to be replaced every approximately 2 days. This will be important later on. Most of the teachers were pretty understanding about this and would often go out of their way to make sure that I could clearly hear what they were saying, such as seating me towards the front of the class and standing directly in front of me when addressing the whole class. Except for one teacher who was a harass about it. She also happened to be a music teacher. She will be known as MSO. Also, this is probably the worst combo because music is also my weakest subject, for obvious reasons. Enter malicious compliance. My form, we're a pretentious school and like to call the class that we register and go to lessons with our form, are off to our music lesson. And this happens to be a double period. Yes, we're pretentious and period means lesson, which is about 1 hour and 30 minutes long. Anyway, so we start the lesson, and pretty much 2 minutes after we sit down, the batteries in my CI had run flat. Remember how I told you earlier that they go flat every 2 days? And so I needed to change them. However, as my bag, which had my batteries in it, was in the room next door, I decided to raise my hand, like an obedient little boy, and ask if I can go and grab my batteries. At this point, I could still lip read and understand what the teacher was saying, but I'd much rather be able to hear LOL. Anyways, she pretty much ignores the fact that my hand is up, and after a couple minutes, I pretty much get the hint that she doesn't want to answer my question. I thought, whatever, I can still lip read and understand most of what she's saying. So MSL basically asks the whole class to go on the computers, listen to an audio file she'd sent us via email, and then use that as inspiration to digitally create our own piece of music. She also wanted us to show it to the class at the end of the lesson. Now, because I didn't want to get into trouble, I raise my hand again to try and ask if I can get the batteries from my bag, but she ignores me again. I don't even like music anyway, so no big deal. As a result, I pretty much sit in front of the computer screen doing nothing, as I can't hear the audio file or make any somewhat decent piece of music. Remember, this is a double period, so a pretty long wait. After 5 minutes, I get bored, and I decide to start talking to my friends. Did I mention I can lip read? And basically let them in on the joke, and we're all trying our hardest to not laugh too hard. Pretty soon, word gets around the class, and now they can't wait until the end of the lesson to see what Miss L's going to do. End of the lesson rolls around, and when it's my turn to play my piece of music, and I pretty much sit in silence, and the whole class starts laughing but trying to stifle it at the same time. This is how the conversation goes between me and her at that point. Miss L, can you not hear me? I asked you to play your piece of music. Ironic, IKR. Me, sits in silence, and the laughter is getting louder. Ms. L, are you even listening to me? Are you trying to disrespect me by not listening to anything I say? Me, well, Ms. L, honestly, just play your piece of music. It's not that hard. Me, trying to stifle my laughter at this point, I can't. Ms. L cuts me off. This is how you treat your teachers? Get out of the class right now. So I get out and pretty much wait there until the lesson is over. I think she was expecting an apology from me, which was never going to happen, because after a couple minutes she pops her head out of the door and barks at me. You have absolutely no respect for your teachers. Meet me at the City View at lunchtime. So I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. At lunchtime, I meet her at the principal's office, like she said. Another important thing is that I'm pretty friendly with the headmaster. She opens the door, and the conversation is as follows. Ms. L. This guy was giving me an attitude during my lesson and wouldn't listen to me. I would give him a Friday after school detention, but I feel that he deserves to get a Saturday detention. Headmaster. Turns to me. What happened? Me. Well, my batteries for my CI died, and I raised my hand to ask if I could get the replacement batteries from my bag, but she proceeded to ignore me. Miss L. Looks like she just had an epiphany. Headmaster. Will, are you sure about this? Because he has not prior record about being disobedient? Ms. L. Looking a bit flabbergasted. Yes, I'm absolutely sure he was disrespecting me. Me? Sir, you know that I'm deaf and that I would never on purposely do that to a teacher. Headmaster. Well, I'm inclined to believe the student here. If you have no proof otherwise, there is nothing to discuss. Miss L then goes extremely red as she realizes her mistake and storms out of the office. The headmaster gave me a slight smile before ushering me out of the office as well. Ever since then, she's never ignored me whenever I've had my hand up. Thanks for reading this. I know it was extremely long. TL. Doctor, I'm deaf and need cochlear implants. CI. To hear. Batteries in my CI go flat, and music teacher gets mad at me because I didn't do any work because I couldn't hear anything. Proceeds to embarrass herself in front of the headmaster. Edit. Wow, I didn't realize I'd get this much of a response. Thank you so much for the gold and silver, and also the general response has been largely positive. The malicious compliance was flawlessly executed. The teacher's ignorance led to her own embarrassment, while you calmly let the situation unfold. It was a perfect example of quiet resistance, where your patience and understanding exposed her mistake without confrontation. The next story from Tapioca, Fumble. Work on this music knowing there will be many problems down the road? Okay. First time posting here and on Reddit, so I apologize if I'm not organizing this as thoroughly as all the awesome posts here. I am an audio engineer. Around 5 years ago, I was working at a very high-end facility with some amazing equipment. The studio looked beautiful. It was quite amazing. Most of my time at the studio was spent recording musical artists and mixing their tracks. I was booked for an 8-hour block to mix some pre-recorded tracks that a producer was going to bring in. To clarify, mixing a song means taking all the individual instrument recordings and balancing volumes and applying effects. After a song is mixed, it's sent to a mastering engineer who puts the final touches on it and makes it ready for distribution. In most cases, especially if it's through a record label, the mixing engineer and mastering engineer are two different people, since they're two different art forms that utilize different technologies. I like to research my clients before they come in, so I did some poking around on the internet and found out very quickly that the producer coming into the studio is a very accomplished producer who has worked with some amazing artists. I was thrilled. I hadn't worked with a producer of this caliber before. We'll call him the producer. I made sure to get as much information as possible from the studio manager so that I could come into the session well prepared. My manager forwarded me an email from the producer that said they were just mixing a few songs. I asked if I was getting an assistant engineer to help. My manager told me that they actually requested that I don't have an assistant. That was a first, but I shrugged it off. I got to the studio early and prepped for as much as I possibly could. The producer and the band that he recorded arrived, so I started getting files and such from them to start mixing. As I'm doing this, I started to see a lot of red flags. The producer brought in 10 songs that he needed mixed and mastered today. Typically, I'll mix 2 songs in 10 hours, maybe 3 if I'm hauling and not taking ear breaks and such. Furthermore, he wanted it to be mixed on our large recording console, the giant desk with all the buttons and faders and such, essentially bypassing the computer. I let him know the following. 1. Mixing 10 songs in 8 hours is going to be very difficult, and that I'll have to sacrifice quality moving that quickly, and that I'll do my best to mix the songs all in one day. 2. I'm not a mastering engineer, but I have experience mastering and can give him some masters that will suffice. I'll provide files they can send to other mastering engineers as well. 3. Mixing on a console instead of a computer means that it will be way more time consuming since I would be turning physical knobs, pushing physical buttons, and connecting gear with cables, and keeping track of all of this. It also means that if they want any edits or changes after today, they'll need to book the studio for at least 2 to 3 additional hours so that I can set everything up again exactly how it was. I figured that since the producer had worked with such amazing artists before, all of this would make sense to him. I got the impression that he either didn't care or, more likely, didn't realize. He was very nice but quite dismissive and essentially told me to mix it on the console. To add to my stress, I started finding all sorts of mistakes and issues in the recording that would take more time to address. Despite this, we worked really well together. I felt I gave him more than enough information about my concerns, so I complied with his requests, knowing full well that we were going to face a plethora of problems down the road. I got to work as fast as I could. The producer was quite eccentric, but we got along nicely and he was thrilled with some of the tricks I was pulling out of my hat to address all these issues. At the end of every mix, I'd take copious notes on what physical buttons were pushed, what cables were connected to what, etc. I did this for every client I've worked with, just in case they ever wanted to come back and make edits to their records. Normally, I'll have my assistant or intern do this, but they specifically asked to not have an assistant or intern around. I was able to get through each of the songs somehow. I was honestly impressed with myself. The songs sounded good, but not good, as I didn't have enough time to make them good. They were happy with the mixes. The producer seemed quite surprised that they sounded the way they did, so I took that as a compliment. We ended on a good note, so I thought that was the end of it. A few days later, I get booked again for 2 hours. We normally don't book 2-hour blocks. It's just not worth it. However, I agreed to the 2-hour because there was another 8-hour session booked directly after, so it worked out perfectly. The studio manager didn't quite understand what I'd be doing in those 2 hours. The client was very vague and would not answer any of our questions about what they wanted to happen in those 2 hours. I show up for the session, and the producer from a few days before was there. Before I can even say hello, a car that costs more than what I make in 2 years comes whipping through the parking lot. This guy jumps out and begins barking orders at me. I put together that this must be the executive producer. For background, an executive producer is essentially the guy that knows nothing about the process, but has the money to fund it. It's a fancy name for the person who pays for everything. As he's barking orders at me, about 10 more ridiculously expensive cars pull in. I learned that the executive producer brought possible investors for his new record label into the studio to listen to the mixes and watch the executive producer manage a production team. After the executive producer greeted all his investors, he instructed everyone to go into the studio. I tried to get him alone to talk to him before, but he responded with, "I'm going to do all the talking, you're going to do the work." He clearly wanted everybody to see how good he was at managing a production and such. He asked me to pull up the first song to play for his investors. I told him that if he wants to make any changes to the songs, I need at least 2 to 3 hours to set everything up before we can make changes. I told him I could play the songs for his investors, but I can't make any changes unless I take the 2 to 3 hours to set it up. I also said that I can't even do that today, since I have another client coming in 2 hours. As I'm saying this, I see the producer behind him smiling, clearly getting a lot of satisfaction from this. The executive producer literally turned red with anger and started yelling. I honestly couldn't understand half of what he said. When the executive producer stopped yelling, the producer cutely said, "I told you so." That's when I realized that the producer had actually been the one who maliciously complied with the executive producer to some degree. This is my favorite part. The executive producer handed me a $100 bill and said something like, "You have 10 minutes to set it up." He did this in front of his investors. I'm not sure what he was thinking would happen. Some of them literally laughed out loud and walked out. I was sick of it, so I emceed knowing that I could never set it up in time, making the executive producer look bad in front of his investors. So I started setting it up anyway. I didn't take the $100. As I was setting up, One of the investors came up to me and asked if I was actually able to set it up in 10 minutes. I told him it wasn't possible, so he turned around and walked out. About 10 minutes later, they all left because I didn't have everything set up yet. Later that week, the producer came back to work with me some more. We had a great working relationship from that point on. I talked with the producer about this whole thing, and he said that the executive producer hired him to help get this record label off the ground. The executive producer apparently didn't listen to anything the producer advised him on and treated him very poorly. So the producer decided to just comply with whatever executive producer wanted, knowing full well it wouldn't work out. He got sick of the executive producer's antics and just wanted out. The producer had informed the executive producer about everything that would go wrong before they booked me for the mix, and the executive producer completely disregarded him. The producer told me that the executive producer didn't want an intern or an assistant at the studio for the mix because he only wanted high-end music production people there. If assistant is in their title, they don't deserve to be there. It turns out that all the investors pulled out, and the band started to sue the executive producer for copyright infringement. That's a separate issue that I have no info on. Edit. Wow, I am blown away by all the comments. Thank you all for reading. Thank you for all your encouraging words as well. The malicious compliance was brilliantly executed. The executive producer's demands were unrealistic, and by complying with them, OP exposed his ignorance and arrogance. His public embarrassment in front of investors, all while staying professional, was perfectly done.